This morning's scripture comes from Psalm 99. You can find it on page 593 in your pew Bibles. I will be reading of the New Revised Standard Version, Updated Edition. The Lord is King. Let the peoples tremble. He sits enthroned upon the cherubim. Let the earth quake. The Lord is great in Zion. He is exalted over all peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Mighty King, lover of justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Extol the Lord our God. Worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were amongst his priests. Samuel also was among those who called on his name. They cried to the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. He kept his decrees and the statutes that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. Extol the Lord our God and worship at his holy mountain, for the Lord our God is holy. Let the Lord bless the reading of his holy word.
Thank you, Alex. I threw him a curveball asking for the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. So good job. Well, good job being on your toes. Thank you, worship team choir. That was lovely. And yes, we are doing Christ the King Sunday. One of our more liturgically aware friends asked this morning, like, we're Baptists, right? Like, what's up with all the liturgical season stuff? And I say, it's my last Sunday to wear green, so we're going to wear green. So Christ the King Sunday isn't in the normal rhythm of Baptist life, but what it means to be Baptist is we kind of get to do what we want. So it is Christ the King Sunday, which isn't a holiday prescribed in the Bible like the feasts of the Old Testament, or a commemoration of an event in the New Testament, such as Christmas or Easter or Pentecost, which sort of does both. Christ the King Sunday does not come to us from that tradition or from sort of the quiet niceties that the name sort of gives us as we start to think about Thanksgiving, as we start to think about Christmas. It doesn't come to us. It's not born in a quiet moment. It's not created out of a season of peace or stability. It comes out of a world of anxiety and tension. It comes to us out of Europe in the early 1920s. The First World War had shattered an entire generation. Empires had collapsed. Economies were in ruin. And people were aching for order, stability, aching for strength, aching for someone, anyone, to promise them that the chaos of the war was really over. The war to end all wars was actually over because the peace to many felt more like a precarious pause. And into that desperation stepped all sorts of new ideologies, making promises of national security, national pride, and economic prosperity. In Italy, a young Benito Mussolini led black shirt squads through the streets, beating opponents, seizing newspapers, intimidating critics. Fascism promised a national rebirth, a restoration of the classical glories of their past. And the people welcomed it and cheered because at least this felt safe. At least Mussolini was strong. But Italy wasn't alone. Across Europe, all these movements were rising and gaining steam. In Germany, anger, humiliation, racial hatred, and conspiracy theories dominated the Weimar Republic. It was just waiting for the right spark. In Russia, communism had taken hold and replaced the old empire with a new ideology that demanded total allegiance. In Spain and Portugal, authoritarian movements were taking shape. Everywhere you looked, nations were reaching for leaders who would make the world feel whole again, who could make their cultures make sense again, who could make them feel safe again. And the church watched all of this with growing alarm. Modernity, the Enlightenment, and the First World War had eroded what was left of the idea of Christendom and all of its power. Pope Pius XI looked out over the world and saw people choosing strongmen, saw people giving their devotion, their heart and their soul and their mind to the gods of this new age, to nationalism, violence, racial purity, the myth of a perfect nation. He kind of saw what was coming. He knew what happened when nations demand worship, when rulers want your soul, when identity and salvation are tied to flags and land and borders and blood. So in 1925, standing in the shadow of rising fascism, like literally, think about where the Pope is making his decisions. He's living in Rome, facing rising fascism, rising communism, rising nationalism, rising hatred, rising tension, rising fear. The Vatican makes a bold declaration, a defiant declaration, a defiant celebration. It started a new feast day. It created a new holiday, Christ the King. And the message was not subtle. No dictator is Lord. No nation saves. No ideology deserves your worship, because Christ alone is King. At first, Christ the King Sunday was placed on the calendar right in front of All Saints' Day. It was like this idea that every holy life, every faithful witness, every martyr, every saint, every Christian that had come before bows to Jesus. Not Caesar, not Führer, not Duce, not party, not nation, but to Christ. But later, the church moves the feast to the last Sunday of the liturgical year, which is where we are today. Next year will be Happy New Year, the beginning of Advent. The last word on the Christian year is not fascism or communism or nationalism or isolationism. The last word is not power or money or fear. The last word is Christ as King, the reign of Jesus. And that's why this day still matters, because every age offers us its idols. Every age has its would-be kings. Every age has voices saying, give us your loyalty, just trust us, and we'll give you what you're longing for. Christ the King Sunday calls us back. It pulls us out of the noise, out of the fear, out of the worship of human power, and roots us again in the kingdom that cannot be shaken. So before we turn towards Advent, towards the hope and love and joy and peace of Jesus in the manger, we stand here and name the truth out loud, that whatever happens, whatever power is fighting, whatever empires rise or fall, that Jesus is Lord. Christ is King. So Christ the King Sunday is not just a history lesson. It's not just a commentary on 1920s Europe. It's a mirror. It shows us something about ourselves, because the temptation to give our loyalties to lesser kings is offered over and over again. And maybe more dangerously for the believer, the temptation to build our own kingdoms never goes away. Here's a truth we don't like admitting. We don't just live under kingdoms. We build our own. We build little kingdoms of control, little kingdoms of comfort, little kingdoms of money, of reputation, little kingdoms out of our status, little kingdoms of our preferences, little kingdoms where we sit on the throne and we get the final word. But this morning, Psalm 99 reminds us that the Lord is King. Let the people tremble. The Lord is great, exalted over all the nations. God is holy, completely different, completely set apart. completely king. This psalm is a thunderclap. It shakes the foundations of man-made thrones. It strips away every illusion of human sovereignty. It says the rightful king has already taken the throne, and his justice, his mercy, his holiness, they're not up for a vote. Psalm 24, 7 through 10 says, "Lift up your heads, O gates, that the King of glory may come in." I feel like we sung that a minute ago. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Psalm 47 says, "The Lord is the Most High. The Lord is awesome, a great king over all the earth." Psalm 93 tells us the Lord is king, rooted and robed in majesty. God's throne has been established since the very start. Daniel 7, 13 and 14, "To God was given dominion and glory and kingship, and all the people should serve him." Zechariah 9, "Behold, your king, your God comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he." Luke 1, 32 and 33 remind us that God will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Revelation 11:15 tells us that the kingdoms of the world vanish. They're absorbed into the kingship of God. In Matthew 28:18, Jesus says, "All authority on heaven and earth have been given to me." And right near the end of the book, Revelation 16, this is Jesus' tattoo. Do you know Jesus has a tattoo? This is Jesus' tattoo. Revelation 19:16 says Jesus has written on his thigh his name and his title, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Christ the King Sunday confronts us with the same challenges that the church faced in 1925. Whose kingdom are you going to live in? Because devotion to Christ is not passive. Devotion to Christ is an active choice. It's a holy rebellion against every rival kingdom. All of the kingdoms out there in the world and in here in our hearts. To follow Christ is to draw a line in the sand and say, "I will not bow to the gods of this age. I will not surrender to fear. I will not serve prosperity. I will not enthrone myself. I will not give my heart to anything other than Jesus." That's what the early church understood when they made one of their first creeds, "Jesus is Lord." It wasn't just a warm devotional phrase, it was a political act. It was a refusal to say that Caesar is Lord. It was treason against the powers of the world, and it cost many of them everything. And it still costs something today. Following Jesus means to dethrone the false kings in our lives. It means surrendering the territories we guard so fiercely, our little kingdoms. It means handing over our kingdoms, piece by piece, to the one whose throne is established and whose reign is everlasting. And the scriptures will not let us pretend otherwise. Matthew 6:24, "No one can serve two masters." Luke 9:23, "Deny yourself and take up your cross and follow Jesus." Colossians 3 tells us to set our mind on things above. Romans 12 tells us to present our bodies as living sacrifices. 1 Corinthians 6 reminds us that we have been purchased by Christ at a great price. And Revelation 11 tells us that the kingdoms of this world will be absorbed, surrendered to the reign of God. Every one of those scriptures offers us, though different words, the same invitation. Lay down your kingdom. Lay down your kingdom in resistance to the world and in submission to Christ. And today, as we celebrate Christ the King Sunday, we stand at the threshold of Advent, as we stand in the presence of the King whose reign cannot be shaken. We have a chance to answer that invitation. Not just with our lips, we profess faith, but with our lives, we're expected to embody faith as well. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about stewardship. And today is our Pledge Sunday, but It's not just a church program. It's not just a way to figure out and build our budget, but it's a posture of discipleship, a way of living under the reign of Christ. So we've been doing all this work. We've thought about what it means to be faithful stewards of our finances, because our money often reveals our loyalties and priorities. We have thought about stewardship of our talents and wisdom, because our gifts were not meant to be hidden. We have thought about stewardship of our time, because voluntarism is often how we about stewardship of community, because God has brought all of us together and put us in this place for a reason. We've thought about the stewardship of our legacies, because the church is bigger than any one of us and will outlast each of us. We have thought about stewardship of creation, because the earth is the Lord's and we are its caretakers on behalf of our descendants. All of these are kingdoms that we try to rule on our own. All of these are places where Christ is calling us to surrender. And this morning, we are invited to make that surrender visible, tangible. We get to embody it. In just a moment, we will have our stewardship altar call. You have your pledge cards, your commitments for this coming year that you've worked on as a family. And I want you to see them not just for what they are, but for what they represent. Not paperwork, not fundraising, not institutional maintenance, but surrender. A symbol of devotion to Christ the King, an act of rebellion against the kingdoms of fear and scarcity. A declaration that we belong to a different kingdom. A kingdom of generosity, not greed. A kingdom of hope rather than anxiety. A kingdom of abundance instead of scarcity. A kingdom where Christ is Lord. And so when we come forward in just a moment, when we walk this center aisle, when we place our cards on the altar, we're laying down our kingdoms. We are crowning Christ as King of our finances, of our gifts, of our time, of our community, of our legacy, and our care for the natural world. We are saying with our feet what our lips have said in worship, that Jesus is Lord, that Christ is King. Church, the invitation is simple, and it's the same one that we often give. Come. Bring your pledge, bring your life, bring your kingdom, and lay it down before the King whose reign has no end. Christ the King Sunday is not a day for ideas alone. It is a day for allegiance, a day for devotion, and a day for surrender. So here's what we're going to do. And if you're a guest with us this morning, I'm sorry, it might be a touch awkward. This is part of the rhythm of our life together. We're going to invite everyone forward. If you're here as a guest today, you are welcome to stay and worship where you are or to come forward. If you're here today and you don't have a pledge card, maybe that's not part of your family's tradition. Maybe you mailed it in. We got a bunch in the mail. Maybe you don't have a piece of paper in your hand and you're worried about feeling a bit awkward. If you're here today with no paper, if you're here today as a non-member, please feel free to come forward. The altar is open. And come to the altar and surrender again or for the first time. Take a moment of prayerful surrender and hand your throne back over to Christ. So in a moment, we're going to stand, and as the music plays, each member of this church is welcome to come forward as you will and lay your pledge card here on the altar, not as a transaction, not as a budgeting exercise, but as an act of worship, as a sign that you are placing your life, your resources, your time, your gifts, and your future under the reign of Christ our King. When you walk this aisle, I want you to feel the weight of what you are doing. You're not just supporting this institution of your kingdom and into his. Come prayerfully. Come gratefully. Come courageously. Come with a sense of holy rebellion against the powers that tell you to cling tighter, to hold back, to stay safe, to keep control. Come with open hands. And when you place your pledge on the altar, let it be your way of saying today that Christ is King. Christ reigns in my life. Christ reigns in my priorities. Christ reigns in my giving and over my future. Church, this is a sacred act, a holy moment, a declaration of allegiance, a declaration of worship, a declaration of the kingship of Christ. The altar is open. Come.